What's going on, guys? Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today I'll be going through my top waiver wire ads entering week 2 of fantasy football, highlighting some of the top performances and storylines of the weekend and how to properly adjust for your fantasy football rosters moving forward. Waivers are a fundamental piece towards building out your teams in fantasy football, and this week's waivers are absolutely no different. Hopefully, you won your matchups, but if you didn't, I'll be outlining 5 main players, 5 honorable mentions, and 3 quarterback and defense streamers to target in week 2. But before we do that, as always, we're going to hit the intro. All right, for the purpose of this video, I'll be sticking to players with a roster percentage of 40% or under to kind of give you a more realistic take as to what should be available on your waiver wire. So, to start off this video, number 5 on my main list is going to be running back from the Philadelphia Eagles, Kenny Gainwell, who currently has a rostership percentage of 9% via Yahoo. And to outline what he did in week 1, he had 9 carries for 37 rush yards and a rushing touchdown, as well as 2 receptions on 3 targets for 6 yards against the Atlanta Falcons. And in week 2, he goes to play the San Francisco 49ers. And the main intrigue that I have with Kenny Gainwell and why I'm especially willing to pick him up in half PPR or full PPR leagues is the type of opportunity share he was able to garner in his first career game. So you guys should see this on the screen, but in his first career game, he garnered a near 38% opportunity share and held a 35% snap rate. You guys can see via Jared Smola of Draft Sharks. And that's significant opportunity. Again, they've kind of hinted throughout this offseason that they will be running more of a committee. And it just so happens to look like Kenneth Gainwell has supplanted Boston Scott as that main number 2 behind Miles Sanders. And if that's the case, I mean, we've seen Kenneth Gainwell, the prospect, be adept in the passing game, be able to spell in the pass, especially at Memphis. I really think he could be a very, very good complementary back to Miles Sanders with a potential standalone value. He's an adept player in the passing game. And if that role can really adjust, given the opportunity was there on Sunday, I can definitely see this being a flex appeal type of PPR back that we kind of look for every week. And of course, if Miles Sanders were to miss any time, we could be looking at Kenneth Gainwell as a potential top 20 back. So absolutely love Kenny Gainwell. In terms of fab percentage, I probably wouldn't spend more than 5 to 10% depending on how needy I am at running back. But again, I still think he's a worthwhile add. And in terms of number one waiver priority pickup, I wouldn't spend it on Kenny Gainwell. So anyways, like Kenny Gainwell, let's go into the division and talk about another player that stood out on Sunday, talking about wide receiver for the New York Giants, Sterling Shepard, who's currently rostered on 39% of Yahoo teams. And this is a guy who absolutely balled out in week 1. 7 receptions on 9 targets for 113 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown versus the Denver Broncos. And unfortunately for myself, of course, had to play against this guy in my main home money league. But week 2 goes up Thursday Night Football against the Washington football team. And the real reason why I'm intrigued by Sterling Shepard is the potential rapport that we could see with him and Daniel Jones. I mean, this is a guy that was able to garner out 9 targets in this first game. And while Kenny Galladay is struggling to acclimate and struggling to really separate himself as that true alpha on this team, Sterling Shepard went out and balled out. Maybe it's the number change, maybe being number 3 just rejuvenated him, but he looked really good on Sunday. And for me, the way I kind of look at Sterling Shepard is he is the ultimate depth piece, a guy that you could throw into your flex spot, throw into your wide receiver 3 spot, and be comfortable with his potential floor range of outcomes. And we saw on Sunday that he does have a ceiling here, 20 points that he put up on Sunday. Now, if you're talking about what type of fab that you would be willing to put on him, I'd say 15 to 20% of your fab, if you're weak at the wide receiver position, would be able to do. And again, I think this is going to be a guy that, similar to a Jarvis Landry, a Cole Beasley in the past, could be that top 35-ish, top 40-ish wide receiver for the rest of the year. And a guy that nobody really talked about going into the season, but one that absolutely returned on value throughout the 2021 NFL season. So Absolutely love what I saw from Sterling Shepard and the potential rapport for him and Daniel Jones. But moving on to number 3 on my list, we're going to be talking about Tim Patrick, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos. Or, if you're more of a KJ Hamler fan, you could also substitute him in here. In terms of Tim Patrick, 2% rostered via Yahoo. And in terms of outlining exactly what he did in week 1, not the most impressive overall baseline stat line. 4 receptions, 4 targets, 39 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown versus the Giants, and goes up against the Jacksonville Jaguars entering week 2 in fantasy football. The main alert that I have for Tim Patrick is, unfortunately, the recent news of Jerry Jeudy's high ankle sprain, expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks via Adam Schefter. And the reason why I would personally prefer Tim Patrick to KJ Hamler, although KJ Hamler is the more dynamic, more explosive player in space, is because Tim Patrick was the next in line once Jared Jeudy was missing time. You guys should see it on the screen. But in terms of snap allocation, obviously you got the main alpha wide receiver with Cortland Sutton at 53 heading the group. But Tim Patrick was actually number 2 on this list ahead of KJ Hamler, nearly double the amount of snaps. Now, do I think these guys can both coexist and be on the field together? Absolutely. This is going to be a team that runs a lot of 11 personnel. KJ Hamler can run the slot. So I do think he's a worthwhile bid in his own right. But we saw Tim Patrick operating as this team's number 2 wide receiver last year really perform out. I mean, he was a top 30 wide receiver last year, performed well. Quarterback upgrade, obviously, this offseason. I mean, what was going on with Teddy Bridgewater this game? He looked absolutely phenomenal. So, Tim Patrick's a guy I'm willing to make that bid on and make him my wide receiver 4 or 5-ish type for the rest of the year. Current fab percentage I would be willing to spend would be around 15 to 20%. I view Tim Patrick and Sterling Shepard as kind of being similar players in the fact that they're more floor plays, but plays that, especially in PPR, can give you a significant amount of value on that waiver wire this week. So absolutely love the addition of Tim Patrick this week. But we can move on and finish out with 2 running backs in a row. But to start off, number 2, James White, running back from the New England Patriots, currently only rostered in 34% of the leagues. And I had to double take this. I had to double check this because I'm sure if you guys are fans of the channel, you would not let James White go undrafted in your drafts. But how is this guy under 40%? Beats me. In week 1, 4 carries for 12 rushing yards and 6 receptions on 7 targets for 49 receiving yards. And in week 2, goes up on the road to play the New York Jets. Again, him being rostered in less than 40% of the leagues just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This was a player that garnered an 18% target share in game 1 with Mac Jones, and he is by far this team's most reliable back in pass catching situations. James White is that perfect hero RB, zero RB type of build where you throw him in as your RB2. He performs well, especially in PPR type of leagues. And again, we shoot for upside for the most part, but if you can get this type of stability on your waiver wire, especially if you went in a full wide receiver heavy with a good tight end, good quarterback type ability, you just need a good, capable RB2. James White can do that in space for you. In terms of fab percentage, if he's available in your leagues, which just seems ridiculous to me, you should still be able to get him for cheap because he didn't necessarily have a crazy game that would make you have to bid everything on him in week 1. But I think 20%, if he's available in your league, should be able to get it done. So absolutely love James White. But the final name on this list, and if you're watching this video, you would have seen the thumbnail. You would have seen other YouTube videos by now. But man, that boy Elijah Mitchell from the San Francisco 49ers, he is absolutely special. 10% rostered thus far via Yahoo. And talking about his week 1 stat line, 19 carries, 104 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown versus the Detroit Lions, and goes up week 2 on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles. Man, when you're talking about Elijah Mitchell, it's easy to see exactly why everybody is in love with his potential in this team. So to start off, we know by now, going into week 1, Trey Sermon was a healthy scratch. Healthy scratch. A guy that we thought was going to lead the backfield, split time with Raheem Mostert. He was the healthy scratch. Kyle Shanahan does not care what type of investment he put into you. Kyle Shanahan cares exactly how much you're willing to put on the field and how well you're willing to play. And Elijah Mitchell played that in spades. You guys can see once Raheem Mostert left with his knee injury, as we'll get into, he led this backfield. 35 snaps. The next closest back to Michael Hasty only had 16. And when you're talking about his overall opportunity share, his workload, Mitchell handled 68% of the snaps and 78% of the rushing attempts. And as you guys can see via Jack Miller, he outsnapped JaMychal Hasty 37-18 and had 19 carries versus just one for JaMychal Hasty. The involvement that we're getting here from Elijah Mitchell, a sixth round pick from Louisiana Lafayette, is absolutely special. And the news with Raheem Mostert, as I kind of said I would allude to, he chipped knee cartilage, which should make him out for 8 weeks. If that's the case, if he's on IR for the next 8 weeks, the most similar profile to Raheem Mostert in terms of play style on this team is indeed Elijah Mitchell. I mean, we're talking about a guy that is adept in the zone game and has legitimate 4.35, 4.4 speed. No other back on the roster can boast what Elijah Mitchell does in terms of fitting that Raheem Mostert role. And we have seen when Raheem Mostert is on the field, he is a viable RB2 in fantasy football. Now, do I think Trey Sermon is completely riddled out of this backfield? No, I think he's going to end up getting some work. It could be a 1A, 1B type of situation, even though Sermon was a healthy scratch. But Elijah Mitchell's the guy I want moving forward. Elijah Mitchell's a guy I think can be that legitimate RB2 type, at least for the next 8 weeks. And again, mention it with James White. If you're in a hero RB, zero RB type of build, these are the type of players you drop the fab on. You drop the dollar on because these are rare. I would bid personally 50+% of my fab, given how exactly much you think you can get them in your leagues. If you're in sharper leagues, feel free to bid more. If you're in more casual leagues, try to save the dollar, but 50+% of the fab is a must allocation for this guy. He is going to be an absolute baller. So let's talk about a few best of the rest type of situations. KJ Osborne, wide receiver from the Minnesota Vikings, 7 receptions, 9 targets, 76 receiving yards in week 1, goes up against the Arizona Cardinals in week 2. And we saw the Vikings use a lot of heavy 11 personnel in week 1, which is a very big transition, knowing that this has been a heavy 12 personnel team for the last few years. So go pick up KJ Osborne, especially in more deeper leagues. Bryan Edwards, we saw on Monday Night Football, played a fantastic game, 4 receptions, 5 targets, 81 receiving yards, and a near touchdown versus the Baltimore Ravens. And as much as I love Henry Ruggs, Bryan Edwards looked more like the Raiders wide receiver one, obviously, of course, after Darren Waller. So I think he's an exciting young stash, not necessarily a guy that I'm willing to throw into my lineups on a week-to-week basis, but a guy that if he keeps playing like the way he did on Monday Night Football, I could potentially trust down the stretch. So love what Bryan Edwards was able to do on the field on Monday. Then we got De'Ami Brown, another rookie wide receiver, 1 reception, 4 targets, -2 receiving yards. So not a great stat line in week 1 against those Los Angeles Chargers, but week 2, Thursday Night Football against the New York Giants. I think Sal Vetri, as you guys can see on the screen, pretty much summed up exactly what De'Ami Brown represented in week 1 to a fullest. If you're looking straight at box scores, he's not going to impress you, but he played 92.7% of the snaps and ran 24 routes, second on the team, leading to 2 to 4 targets. Now, when you're talking about that, after Terry McLaurin, this team needs playmakers in the passing game. Logan Thomas is fine, but realistically, with Curtis Samuel out, De'Ami Brown showed that he was that next in line wide receiver. And in a more favorable matchup, if you will, I do think that De'Ami Brown is going to potentially start heating up down the stretch, especially with Curtis Samuel expected to be out a while with that groin injury. So keep an eye out for De'Ami Brown. They should be able to get him pretty cheap considering he had a very mediocre week 1 performance. But talking about the next player on the list or honorable mentions list, it's going to be Terrace Marshall, wide receiver from the Carolina Panthers. 3 receptions, 6 targets, 26 receiving yards, and in week 2 goes up to play the New Orleans Saints. The main allure of Terrace Marshall, as always, this is an elite usage wide receiver 3 on a team that uses heavy 11 personnel with the Panthers. Terrace Marshall logged 34 snaps, which was the clear wide receiver 3 role for the Panthers. And in that first ever career game, he was able to garner a 17% target market share. So I think this could possibly be a situation similar to T. Higgins last year. Again, I expect this guy fully week 3, week 4 waiver wire to be one of the top ads, but if you can get it for cheap now and stash him on your bench, could ultimately pay a good amount of return on investment compared to what you would have to bid in future weeks. And then final honorable mention I'm going to say is Damian Williams, running back from the Chicago Bears. 6 carries, 12 rushing yards, and 4 receptions on 7 targets for 28 receiving yards in week 1. And in week 2 goes up against the Cincinnati Bengals. The main allure I have for Damian Williams, especially in full PPR type of leagues, is that he was able to muster despite playing behind a well-performing David Montgomery, a 42% snap share, and 4 receptions on 7 targets. I really think that Damian Williams has this Tariq Cohen role kind of locked down and could be a decent standalone PPR type of player, and obviously has a ton of RB2 type of upside if Montgomery were to miss any time. So love what Damian Williams can bring to the table as both a stash handcuff as well as a standalone last second flex slash RB2 play. So we talked about the players. We talked about my top 5. We talked about the honorable mentions, best of the rest. Now let's get into some streamers going into week 2. Quarterback streamers. Teddy Bridgewater, quarterback, Denver Broncos, going up week 2 against the Jacksonville Jaguars that were absolutely decimated by the Houston Texans passing attack. We saw Denver really put on the pedal against that New York Giants secondary. Teddy Bridgewater played well, as I mentioned, with Tim Patrick, and this could be a potential low-key stack that you run in your lineups on Sunday that could pay absolute dividends, because if Teddy Bridgewater is slinging the rock like that, listen, that Jaguars secondary is going to have a lot in store for what the Denver Broncos are going to bring on that game. So absolutely love Teddy Bridgewater this week. Jameis Winston, quarterback, New Orleans Saints, one of the most efficient stat lines this week. Less than 20 passing attempts, yet was able to garner 5 passing touchdowns. I believe that the volume in this game against the Carolina Panthers is going to go up. Although he might not throw for 5 touchdowns again, I do think that Jameis in store for a 250-yard, 300-yard type of day with maybe 2 to 4 type of touchdowns. I really think that the Saints passing attack is going to have their way with that Carolina Panthers secondary. And finally, Kirk Cousins, quarterback from the Minnesota Vikings, week 2 against Arizona. And we saw down the stretch in that game against the Bengals that the Vikings passing attack after a slow start was really starting to heat up on the backs of Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, and obviously Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. Now, I do think that this game against Arizona is going to have sneaky high shootout potential. Well, not sneaky high. We know it's going to be a shootout. And if that's the case, I mean, I want every part of this game. I want Cardinals players. I want Vikings players. I want Kirk Cousins. He is an ultimate DFS play in a game that I really expect to be a 42-35 type of shootout. So absolutely love Kirk Cousins as a streamer. Defensive streamers. New Orleans Saints, week 2 against the Carolina Panthers. I mentioned it with Jameis Winston having a favorable matchup on the other side. But although he played well in week 1, let's not kid ourselves. Carolina is still led by Sammy Darnold. And although he had a promising start to his Panthers career, we saw what the New Orleans Saints were able to do against Aaron Rodgers. Absolutely made him look like a child in that game. And unless Sammy Darnold has really turned a full corner, I expect it to be much of the same for that New Orleans Saints ferocious defense that we saw in week 1. So absolutely love that potential to put up points, both sacks, turnovers, you name it. Saints defense is a fine play. Another one's going to be the New York Giants, week 2 against that Washington football team on Thursday Night Football. And this is one what I really point my eye to the fact that Ryan Fitzpatrick's expecting to be placed on IR. And as a result, Taylor Heineke is expected to start this game. Now, is Taylor Heineke going to be bad? No, I just don't necessarily believe that this is going to be a high-scoring game between the Giants and the Washington football team. I expect it to be a 10-7, 13-7 type of game with a lot of sacks, maybe a potential turnovers. We know Daniel Jones on the other side is going to turn the ball over. So we'll see if the Giants defense is able to hold and potentially take the ball away from Taylor Heineke and this Washington football team a few times. So I like that potential scenario where Giants, super low owned, you're able to get a discount on them on the waiver wire after a poor week 1. Because I'd still think that this is a fine defense, good secondary that could really clamp up that Washington football team offense. And finally, Green Bay Packers week 2 against the Detroit Lions. Tough start against the Saints, but I do think there's a potential scenario where they bounce back. And although the Lions defense or Lions offense really showed out down the stretch against that San Francisco 49ers defense and ended up coming back in that game, I still believe that the Green Bay Packers should be able to outmatch Detroit. And obviously, we know if Detroit's playing a catch-up-all game, it's going to lend itself to more opportunities for sacks, turnovers, you name it for the Packers. So I like that potential Monday Night Football stream. But yeah, if you made it this far in the video, you enjoyed these waivers, hit that like button down below. And as always, subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers. As always, love you guys.
Why you need the money?